With interest rates rising nearly 3% in the last 3 months and house prices are higher than ever, many borrowers are priced out of the market. So what are some other non-traditional options for getting into a home? In this video, I'm going to walk you through the pros and cons of rent to own, and then I'm going to wrap it up all in a little bow for you at the end to tell you who would be the best candidate for this option. So let's jump into it. Hey, what's up guys? I'm Ben Sun. Welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. If this is your first time, I don't just talk about surviving this crazy housing market. I also talk about things like personal finance, investing, and real estate. So if that interests you, please hit that big red subscribe button. So rent to own is exactly what it sounds like. You find a property owner that is willing to rent you a property for a certain period of time, and then at the end of it, you have the option to buy the property. And a portion of the rent that you pay every month goes towards the principal to when you're ready to buy later on, that rent will be factored in and it will reduce the price of the home. This is generally done as more than just like a handshake deal. It's usually done through a contract. There are a few different ways to do a rent to own or a lease to own deal, and we'll get into that more in just a second. But first, let's talk about the pros of rent to own. Why would you do this over going to get a mortgage or just straight up renting? The first main reason to do this over going to, say, get a mortgage would be you don't have to qualify for a mortgage, meaning you don't have to have a certain credit score, you don't have to have a down payment, although there could be an option fee, which we'll talk about more in just a second as well. But you don't have to go through the traditional mortgage process. You can negotiate it directly with the seller. And to piggyback off that, why would you do this over renting? And one of the big things is you get the option to buy. So if you like where you're at and you've been paying rent towards it, the rent's not going to waste. It gets applied towards the purchase price at the end of the lease. And you effectively get to test out the house before you actually buy it. One of the things that I've seen recently about this type of deal is that a lot of renters like where they're living and they don't want to move out, but rents are getting too expensive. And if they were in a rent to own deal, they could have or exercise that option to buy. That way they don't have to move, and all the money that they've been paying over the last 2 years or so has been going to the principal of their loan. One of the other pros is that you can fully negotiate the price or what else is in that price. So if you needed any repairs to the home, you could negotiate that into the price, or you could try to. Obviously, it depends on the seller, but you have a little bit more leeway of discussing those options. Whereas a traditional mortgage, you don't have that option, and obviously renting, you don't have any say. You're a renter. Obviously, they have to keep the property up to livable standards, but you don't get any say in what upgrades are done or anything like that. And number three is you get to negotiate the terms of the deal and the monthly payment. Because you're renting and you're going to be owning it at the end, and a portion of that monthly payment comes out and goes towards the principal, you can negotiate what that is. So you could potentially get the house that you like for an affordable price while you're trying to, let's say, increase your credit score, while you're trying to do the things that you can do to put you in a position to actually buy the home later on. Now, one of the other parts of negotiating the terms and the monthly payment is you could also ask to lock in the price of the home. Meaning if you have a lease that's for a year and a half, meaning that you're going to buy it at the end of the year and a half, you could lock in the price now instead of a year and a half from now. Now, obviously it depends on if the housing market in your area is trending down. Probably not a good idea to do. If it's trending up, it might be worth asking or trying to negotiate that. And as part of that price, keep in mind that there are no realtor fees. There's not really any fee at all. There might be, again, an option fee. I'll talk about that in the cons section, but there's no realtor fees, and realtor fees can usually be 6 or 7%. You don't have a realtor involved, the seller might be willing to give you a better deal because they don't have to pay any fees associated with a traditional closing. Ultimately, it comes down to it's a much more flexible way to get into a home. You're not locked into those rigid traditional mortgage guidelines like having very good credit, having down payment, closing costs, and realtor fees, all these other things that go into a mortgage. And you not being able to negotiate the terms because mortgages are 30, 20, 15. You could have any term that you want. If you want to find out how to get a mortgage without all the down payment and closing costs, check out my mortgage playlist. I have a couple videos on there that walk you through how to get 0% down, what to look for on getting down payment assistance, those types of things. So check out that mortgage playlist. So with that flexibility also can come some massive downsides, or at least pitfalls, that if you don't know what you're doing or you don't know what to look for, they can get you in some serious trouble. So let's get into the cons of why you wouldn't want to do a rent to own. The first one, I'll tag back to what I was talking about a couple minutes ago, and that is there is no down payment, but there could be what's called an option fee. An option fee is just a fee that you give the seller to give you the right to buy the property later. Again, these aren't handshake deals, these are contract binding, and part of that is an option fee. Usually it's between 1% and 5%, and so it really kind of is in some ways a down payment, but it's basically you're putting it in a contract saying, hey, I gave them 1%, and now I have the right to option it later, or an option to buy later on. So if you were looking for a completely cost-free way to get into a home, this might not be it. Again, depending on your seller, depending on the deal that you negotiate. So con number two, as I said earlier in the video, there are a few different ways to buy a property using rent to own. And it kind of depends on the type of contract that you're using. So the most traditional way of a rent to own is just that. It's a rent with the option to buy at the end of the rental period, meaning that you could walk away if you don't want to. You basically are treated as a renter, and then they give you the option to buy later on. And the rent that you spent during that time period just gets treated like normal rent. It obviously doesn't get applied to the purchase price later on, should you choose not to exercise your option. Now, the other type is called lease to purchase. It's the same thing, or it's treated the same way, only you don't have the option to buy later on. You're required to buy at the end. These can also be considered land contracts in a way, but basically it is you're renting the property and then you sign a contract saying that you will purchase it at the end. And so depending on your situation or the reason why you're doing rent to own rather than a traditional option, you're saying that you're going to buy it and you might not be ready given your circumstances. Let's say for instance, you have lower credit and you're not ready to qualify for an FHA or conventional mortgage. What happens if your credit's not up to par or up to the standard that you would need at the end of that rental period? Or if you don't have a down payment or you don't have enough money. I mean, there's a ton of different reasons on why the situation might change. And now you're in a situation where you have to buy. It's a binding contract. Again, these aren't handshake deals. So you would be legally binding or legally required to buy the home. Obviously, consult a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. But generally speaking, these are fairly strict binding contracts. So you could find yourself in a legal bind if you didn't do all the proper due diligence ahead of time. And all the money that you put into the property obviously goes away, so you would lose that as well. Now, con number three is, how are the rents applied to the end purchase price? It would be up to you and the seller to keep track of that accurately. And I can tell you from experience that often does not happen. A lot of times there's miscommunications, it's not accurately tracked. You guys have different numbers, or they say that you agreed on something that you didn't agree on. There can be a ton of different reasons why that number at the end is wrong. And it leads to a lot of disagreements. And unless you have everything written down and everything tracked properly, this can lead to a bunch of different arguments, and ultimately it can kill a deal. And I've happened to see it where the price of the house goes up and conveniently there's miscommunication and it kills the deal, and the seller ends up being able to sell the property for more than what they would have sold it to you. Again, these can be legal battles and stuff. I'm not going to get into all of that, but I've just seen a lot of these situations where there's miscommunication and there's not really anyone to turn to. You kind of got to go to the court system if it's not completely figured out or you guys both aren't on the same page ahead of time. Now, the fourth con is maintenance and upgrades. Because you are renting with the option to buying, the sellers usually treat it like you're an owner on the property. Therefore, you're responsible to do things like maintenance and upgrades. They are usually responsible for things like property taxes, insurance, because those things, if they're not paid, there can put a lien on the property, and there's a whole bunch of legal trouble. And since you're not technically on the title of the home, the seller still owns it until you actually buy it. So they usually pay those things, but you're responsible for any maintenance and upgrades. And doing like gutters and cutting grass and that stuff's not that big of a deal. But what happens if a storm comes and the roof caves in? You could be responsible for that. Now, you would be responsible for that if you owned the home. The problem is you don't own the home. So you're putting money into a property that you don't actually own yet. And that can be very dangerous, because should anything go wrong, and you not want to buy the home later on, you just dumped a bunch of money into a house that you don't own, and you don't recuperate because that was part of the contract. So you could be spending thousands of dollars on the home, and you never planned that into the expenses or the advantages of doing a rent to own. So it's really important that you figure out who's responsible for what. Who's responsible for like things if a storm comes, who's responsible for water damage or a hot water heater breaking or one of those big repairs. Who's responsible for those, so that you can build it into the negotiation later. So there's a bunch of big pros and some big cons. And so who's the best candidate for a rent-to-own situation? A rent-to-own is great for a homeowner who isn't financially ready, meaning someone that needs to get their finances in order, whether it be credit, down payment, wants to pay off collections or pay off debt, things like that. Doing a rent-to-own is going to be great for someone like that. And so another good candidate would be like contractors, self-employed borrowers, non-traditional income earners, like people that don't have a 2-year history of owning a business, people that have 1099s, but maybe they go job to job, temporary workers, people that in a traditional mortgage sense get rejected because they have, let's say, what's deemed in the mortgage world as an unstable income, meaning they go job to job, or if they just started a business and they're doing well, but they don't have a 2-year tax return history, things like that, YouTubers, people like that, those instantly get rejected. And a rent to own is going to be a great way to get you into a home and start building equity into that home, and then give you some time to not only build up your down payment, but to build employment history that would be suitable for, say, a traditional mortgage. And the third type of candidate is actually kind of unique. It's as house prices have risen and risen in certain areas, it bumps the borrower into what's called a jumbo loan. A jumbo loan just varies depending on the area that you're in. Higher cost areas have higher limits. In my area, any loan amount over $524,000 goes to a jumbo loan. Now, the difference between that and a conventional loan is a jumbo loan are generally going to require higher credit limits, or higher credit scores, and they're going to require higher down payments, usually between 20 and 40%. And so we're seeing this group of people who, now that the housing prices are higher, and in certain areas they're much higher, it's bumping them into a place where they can no longer put 5% down on a conventional mortgage. They might have to put 20 or 40% down. Or maybe they just don't want to put that amount of money down. On $1 million loan, 40% is $400,000. I'd rather have that in the market personally, but it's creating a situation where they're having to put more money down, and it's causing them to have to meet different credit requirements than what they originally thought. Do you have any questions about rent-to-own or land contract? Is there anything I missed that you would like answers to? Comment down below. And if you got value out of this video and want to see more like it, please hit that big red subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next one.